This is Queer from the Other Side.
Your queer approach to everything from the paranormal and supernatural realms.
With no subject left unexplored.
I'm Shana, your resident witch with the talent for hunting ghosts and connecting with Earth's energy.
I'm Alexander, your in-house skeptic, with my own ghost stories and obsession with outer space. But will I ever believe?
And I'm Derek, your on-air spiritualist on a mission to awaken souls to ground their spiritual power into their physical experience, bridging heaven and earth.
Get ready to explore.
Here we go.
The show starts now.
Hello and welcome to Queer from the Other Side. We are your queer approach to all things paranormal and supernatural with nothing left unexplored. I'm Intuitive Shana and I am your resident witch.
I'm Derek Jameson, and I think today is appropriate for me to say I'm the resident alien.
This is our resident alien, Derek, and our resident skeptic, Alexander. Unfortunately, couldn't be with us today. He's under the weather, so we are sending him love, and he's so disappointed because he was so excited for today's topic. So I'm going to bring us right into it. We have a wonderful guest today. He is an author, an independent journalist. He's a radio talk show host, a former TV talk show host, former U.S. Senate staff member. He has articles that have appeared in the New York Times and Esquire, San Francisco Chronicle, the Idaho Statesman, and the Pacific Sun. And he's coming to us all the way from Northern Florida today. Everyone, please welcome to the show, Keith Thompson. Thank you so much Thank you so much for joining us today, Keith. How are you doing? Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show. I hope that everything is good in your neck of the woods. We just talked a little bit, and you're blessedly out of the way of the hurricane, so that's good news for you.
Exactly. It's always good to be out of the path of those kinds of storms, and to be recognized how blessed each moment is that we have on this earth. Absolutely.
And speaking of being on this earth and not from this earth, you have a wonderful book that I just read called the UFO Paradox. I want to just tell you, I actually have an alien phobia that has started since I was a kid. So I wasn't sure how I was going to feel. I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to try and read this book. How am I going to feel about it? I was so nervous. I actually found it really intriguing. I love some of the accounts in there. And I was just telling Derek, the one that stands out the most that I thought was actually really funny was the recount of, I think it was 1961, there was a gentleman that had a UFO land, I think, in his yard, and 3 5-foot tall aliens came out that were described as Italian looking. And what I thought was hilarious was, I think if I encountered a UFO that close, I would freak out. I would probably at least pass out, to say the least. But this guy asked them for cookies, and I just really loved that story.
It's a great story because I included it because it speaks to the sense in which the happenings within a UFO experience are absurd. They're almost ludicrous at face value, which it makes it possible for the what I call the agents of official culture, who take the role of the debunker. And I make the distinction between debunking and genuine skepticism. And it's okay to be skeptical, ask critical questions, but the debunker is the one who says, well, that couldn't have happened. These don't happen. We represent science or academia. And I am a big critic of that attitude of simply ruling things off the table. So that particular story, Joe Simonton, he was left behind some little cakes, which the military investigated and found out were made of grain and salt and ordinary water. So there are aspects of the UFO phenomenon that almost cancel the phenomenon, and that's how I think it gets into our psyches at a deeper level.
I think that's a really great way to describe it, and I think it's really interesting with some of the accounts that you put in your book. They range from people that have military experience to school children, and all of the encounters were different. And I like that you said they can kind of be absurd because, they kind of can. And why not? Why do we have this expectation of it to be super scary or a certain way? Like maybe there's just someone running really weird on a playground, or them making substandard tasting cookies.
You mentioned that you were worried about being frightened. I appreciate your candor on that. I've been told by several people that mine is the first book about UFOs that didn't scare them. I mean, especially the books on alien abduction. Wow. they are written in a way that emphasizes the fear. And it's never really clear whether, to what extent the fear is related to, would it be the same fear that somebody would have if they were undergoing a therapeutic, let's say, psychedelic experience? A therapeutic or spiritually based, inner-directed psychedelic experience. They might come up against certain psychological material that sort of emerges on a psychedelic trip. But it's not welcome. You have difficult experiences on a psychedelic trip, or for that matter, on a spiritual journey of many different kinds. So is it difficult because it's intrinsically difficult material, or is it sometimes difficult because it's asking us to open to something new? And it touches on the extent to which all of us have, boundaries we want to have respected. This is clearly a phenomenon that is entering into our life space. And I say that without any certainty. As you know from the book, I don't know with certainty that they are extraterrestrial as opposed to interdimensional from other universes, parallel universes, the same areas that paranormal, parapsychological phenomena come from. So I'm agnostic on those kind of questions, but that there is something that is happening, that is real, that surpasses our scientific framework, that's pretty clear. The answer is yes.
I think it's good to also be very open to that and not polarized to any one belief, regardless if that is, yes, I believe in UFOs and they are real, or if it is paranormal, or if it's psychological, or if it's consciousness. All these different areas, I think, are important for us to open up to, because they all have different levels of information that can provide information and insight, and then we can make our own decisions. Because what you talk about in your book is about the UFO phenomenon, and you're coming at it from different levels. For me, I have experiences with extraterrestrial life that is more based in consciousness, but I also have experiences in my physical room. I just had experiences this week, 2 nights in a row, with beings coming into my room. I could see them. It was a very physical experience, but that's very different than something that you write about when you're talking about a physical UFO coming. So I really like this discussion of looking at how contact work happens from physical experiences and also consciousness and paranormal kind of expansion.
Well, one thing you've touched on something important there. Well, I emphasize, as you know, the significance and the relevance of what the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung called synchronicity. Mm-hmm. Synchronicities. We all know what synchronicities are in our life. It is when there's a meaningful coincidence between a psychological state and a physical event, but not in the way that one causes the other. Mm-hmm. It's not a mechanistic cause. I mean, if I throw the volleyball, it'll land somewhere. So that's cause and effect. But an example of synchronicity is, for instance, when you find yourself thinking about an old friend, maybe somebody from high school. You haven't had contact with this friend since high school. And you say, when I have time, I'm going to look up my friend Jim and see what's up. And then within a day comes a phone call. You pick it up, and the caller says, "Hey, Keith, you won't believe this. This is Jim from high school." And you say, "Oh, yeah, I do believe it." It's like, okay. Or those times in the grocery, you're in the checkout stand aisle, and you have a strange feeling that someone might be staring at you. And you turn around, and indeed there is somebody. And they're a little embarrassed. It isn't really that the staring's not the point. It's that somehow you knew subliminally you were being stared at. Mm-hmm. So the UFO phenomenon falls into the same kind of category. It's a phenomenon that cuts across the divide between the physical and the psychic, or the psychological, which of course Western science says never the twain shall meet. There's a strong divide between the objective outer world, the subjective inner world. Well, the UFO phenomenon, it's like it didn't get the memo that it's not supposed to be able to do what it does. For instance, someone is driving. A UFO experience that's fairly common is someone's driving, they're coming home from a long night, a social event, or maybe coming home from work, and they get a sense, and it's a very strong sense. Look out the window to the left. And it's a kind of calling that doesn't happen very often. for this person at all. They turn and they look, and it is a saucer type, a craft, what appears to be a craft. I often emphasize the appear because these phenomena materialize and then they also dematerialize. So if it is purely an object, physical object only, what would be the basis for it calling to the person? Communicate. What is the basis for that? That's a psychic dimension, in the same sense that telepathy and clairvoyance and precognition are very common aspects. So I didn't come into this with a belief in paranormal phenomena, but because I'm take an empirical approach, and I love the way these stories emerge, and I say love, I'm curious. I came at this originally as a 12-year-old sixth grade student. When it was my turn to give a current events report, I chose the UFO phenomenon because it happened to be going on in my in the state next door to mine. Growing up in Northwest Ohio, there was a celebrated UFO case. So I told about it to my class, and it came time for questions, and somebody said, well, Keith, what do you think it was? Do you think it's aliens from outer space? I said, I don't know. I'd been studying it for 2 or 3 days in order to give this report. I said, what people saw were lights and objects that didn't make sense. And I will never forget my teacher, a woman named Mrs. Lowry, came up to the front of the class near the end and said, I think what Keith is saying is that it's important to keep an open mind and ask relevant questions. Guys, I can't tell you how affirming that was for a 12-year-old, is standing up as a kind of cub reporter in the classroom and giving a report on an item in the news, and for her to give me, it was like kind of a benediction. I felt heard and seen. And then she also said, she came up, kind of put her arm around me and said, good work, Mr. Thompson. You have the makings of a reporter, or maybe a scientist, possibly even a detective. And then she put her hands up rather enthusiastically and said, follow the evidence wherever it leads.
Oh, I love that.
And again, that had a huge impact on me too, to be 12 years old, and it was your turn to give a report and you want to do a good job. I didn't on that day decide to be a UFO investigator, but what it encouraged me to do was to stay with the subject or other subjects that there's controversy about. And I went on to become a journalist. I don't know that I would have become a journalist if I hadn't had that early pat on the back and encouragement to stay with it, ask the questions. You don't have to have all the answers. And that's a big theme, as you know, in my book.
And at that time, that was your first experience with really researching UFOs. That was you dipping your toes into the alien pond, if you will. But since then, you've had so much time to research and explore this topic. How have your views changed from when you first started studying this as a kid and were like, I don't fully know what it was, I'm not sure. Like, where do you stand now with it?
Well, that's a good question. I was, even as a young person in the 12th grade, I was familiar with the fact, as I looked into it, that the UFOs show up on radar. They have a temperature signature, totally consistent with a physical object. They appear in geometric space, again, confirming that it's a physical event. Sometimes interact with branches of trees or burn marks on the ground. And yet the same phenomena, the same apparent craft, and I stress the word apparent, what appears to be a craft will sometimes break into 2 or 3 craft. And then orbs of light have different densities, opaque versus translucent, and then will sink into the ground. So on the one hand, it behaves like a physical object, and then it's almost anti-physical. So what in keeping with my teacher's advice to me as a young person, follow the evidence wherever it leads, I said, well, this is the paranormal. You know, this is what the movies about the paranormal, the Twilight Zone, that there are perhaps dimensions beyond time and space as we know it. And I'm very aware that mainstream science disregards that idea. Ironically, they tend to disregard it and rule it off the table in advance. But that isn't doing science. That's more like religion. You know, ironically, it was a scientific figure named Galileo in Italy who had reached the conclusion based on his computations and his use of a telescope. It's an amazing device. He's one of the first to use a telescope. He looked into the sky and with his computations and his own eyewitness report concluded, wait a minute, the Earth orbits the sun, not the other way around. He began to make this view known, and sure enough, he got a knock on the door from the Vatican, which at that time, science did not yet fully exist and have its own footing. So if your scientific findings diverged from the faith-based claims of the church, you'd get in real trouble. He continued to report that the Earth orbits the sun, and he was sentenced to house arrest. So ironically, in our era now, it is those often in the name of science who poo-poo the UFO phenomenon or the near-death phenomenon, paranormal phenomena in general, for which there is actually very good scientific evidence. But the mainstream of science, per se, is still behind the eight ball. And so I don't expect science to lead the way, because these experiences happen to ordinary people.
It's interesting that you're bringing up religion and science in this instance, because in your book, you actually reference UFO encounters in relation with really profound spiritual experiences and rituals, coming of age things, shamanistic rituals, and things of that nature that kind of mark who we are as people and where we are on our journey. And you kind of bring in a perspective that a UFO encounter can kind of be along the same lines or in line with that. Can you speak a little bit more about your belief about UFOs as a potential spiritual encounter?
Yeah, very, very good. I'd be happy to. I was influenced at a young age. I happened to meet the great mythologist Joseph Campbell. He had retired from teaching at St. Lawrence College. He was not yet famous for his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which described the stages of what he called the hero's journey. Now, his insight in that book was that all of the world's myths of all the different cultures tend to come down to a certain plot structure, where a hero who does not see himself or herself as a hero, but a protagonist going through the ordinary affairs of life, has a calling of some kind, happens upon an event or an experience, and they know that they must go on a quest of some kind. We see this in the Arthur tales, the Arthur's Round Table and the search for the Holy Grail. So I was influenced by Campbell, and part of the way he influenced me as I got into the UFO reports, I said, wait a minute. Campbell talks about a 3-stage model, that the protagonist of a myth is first separated from their ordinary reality. So stage 1 is you have an experience that separates you from your ordinary picture of reality. This ain't like what we thought it was. As Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. But where are we? Well, that's stage 2. Stage 2 of a life-transforming journey, or a rite of passage, is to end up in a betwixt and between zone. Don't we all know those? When we've had either a powerful philosophical, spiritual experience, or for that matter, some recognition about our own identity, something about who we are that doesn't jive with what our religion may have told us, our family of origin. We know we have a purpose that isn't explained by the myths of our conventional society. Finally, Campbell talked about the 3rd stage. After going through a long period in this betwixt and between stage, which he likened to a wasteland or to a dark forest. So again, don't we all know those periods when we're in the forest, when we've ended a relationship or had a spiritual experience of light or darkness, and we don't know who we are anymore? For Campbell, that was a prerequisite. Good. Not knowing who you are means you're open to becoming something new. So the 3rd stage was to return to your culture with some new information or insight. Well, I give you that background because I came to realize that the experiences of UFO witnesses, UFO close encounter people, abductees, people who report the experience of being taken by aliens and experimented on, that's a larger story. That could almost take the show devoted to that. But these are life-changing experiences, and I decided to emphasize the human, experiential, inner-directed, the part of these that are meaning-based, that have to do with our sense of purpose. In fact, as you know, I describe the UFO phenomenon ultimately in a metaphoric sense as a call from the cosmos. And again, metaphorically speaking, the cosmos is calling us to a bigger picture of reality. Now, until a calling is responded to, it's really just a monologue. We get a calling. And I think collectively there is a calling. This phenomenon is telling us that our maps of reality are not complete. And so taking an open-minded response to this phenomenon, as well as near-death phenomena, paranormal phenomena, which most of us have paranormal experiences. The mainstream materialist model that we live in tells us, they're mere coincidence, because in the materialist worldview, there's no significant role for consciousness. Consciousness is a mere side effect. Well, in fact, it looks like consciousness is probably primary. It may be the very basis of all that is. It's the ground of being. So these are the kind of things I write about, as you know, and it's in that sense, it's not just a UFO book. It is very often shown, it is placed in the UFO and paranormal section of bookstores, but I found it in religious sections, I found it in psychology, found it in science, I find it in current events, new nonfiction. So I like that. I like the fact that it fits in more than one category, because most of life, as you've noticed, doesn't really fit just one category.
Well, it seems like that's why there's more stories coming forward. So back years ago, we had a lot of the alien abduction stories that were coming forward, and that's why a lot of those movies like Fire in the Sky, or that one with Mila Jovovich, all these accounts that were taking place were so fear-based, just going back to that, and we're going into the abduction stuff, but now we're seeing a lot more UFO witnessing and videos and contact work taking place on different levels. You have people connecting with different higher levels of consciousness that they consider extraterrestrial. You have a lot of contact work happening right now, and I think that goes along with what you're saying, where we're in a different place. We've had different levels of experience, and our consciousness has come to a certain level that is now ready to receive more connections, whether that's a vision of a UFO in the sky, or a synchronistic moment of seeing something out your window, or that's contact with an extraterrestrial being in a meditation. I've had all those experiences for myself throughout my life. I'm 42 years old. That started when I was a kid. It evolved from a place of fear, where it was fear of abduction and that kind of mentality. So as you were talking about that, I was like, that's where I came from as a kid. Now at this point, I'm actively in, meditations, connecting with higher consciousness, extraterrestrial beings who are exchanging information with me. But that took me going through a healing experience for myself to rid myself and heal the fear I had around it. So I think that that's where we're seeing a lot of these different connections happening. There's a healing happening of the fear that already exists within, that allows this phenomenon to come forward more today and allow us to have better experiences.
You know what? My experience is the opposite of yours, actually. When I was a child, I found aliens fascinating. I liked aliens. I liked ghosts. I was into anything that was just obscure and not of the mundane. I was all about it. And I kept my attachment for my love of ghosts. But one day I woke up and wanted nothing to do with aliens anymore. I was terrified of them. Like, it got to the point, even as a young adult, if I overheard part of an alien documentary, if I had to wake up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I would make someone come with me and check to make sure there wasn't an alien behind the shower curtain. In my 20s, I would do that.
Wow.
It was, so I had the complete opposite, but now I'm not necessarily afraid of it. I think I'm just kind of moving past that part. I'm not afraid. I'm still not a fan of just the idea of space in general. It's even hard for me to carry a conversation with some of my astrology friends. I don't do planets. I don't do space. Not what I do. But I see what you're saying. And one thing I will say, too, is we also have social media and we have the internet now, where before people would make these reports in the 40s or the 60s, and it was just so sensationalized. And some people would say, yes, I believe you. But most of the time, not only were the people that witnessed it poo-pooed on, the journalists that reported it, like, they were risking ruining their careers by even reporting this. But now we have such a mass exposure to these things. Everyone has phones in their hand where we can record things too. So it's becoming a more accepted occurrence because we're all getting glimpses of it, and people that we know and trust are sharing their own experiences, and I think that's kind of part of it too. But speaking of people sharing their experiences, Keith, I did want to ask you a question about one report that you did put. I think like an entire, like one of the earlier chapters was about this gentleman. I think Ken Arnold was his name.
Yes. And
he had an experience that really kind of defined part of what we kind of look at as far as the UFO experience now, because of the miscommunication that happened with this term flying saucers, which is what we're all familiar with, flying saucer. And that has become, even like in the media, how they're depicted and drawn in this saucer-like thing. But according to you, that wasn't what he was trying to convey. And what more so is what he really did see is what spoke to me and kind of brought this new idea of what a UFO could potentially be that I never thought about. And I would love it if you could explain it to our listeners.
Oh, that's just a great question, and you've set it up so beautifully. I love talking to you guys. It's like somebody teeing up the ball on the golf course. And lets me take the kind of shot I'd like to tee off. And I say that because, yes, I've referred to Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting in June of 1947. Private pilot, he was out searching for a crashed airplane over Mount Rainier in the state of Washington. He was a very experienced pilot. He saw outside his windshield 9 objects flying in formation at rapid speed, about 10,000 feet. Never seen anything like it. He described them, he called it in, and nobody knew anything about what he was talking about. He said, well, they when he landed and the media had heard that he'd seen something they'd already gathered for his report, he said they were like, the objects seemed to move as if they were like plates skipping over water, saucers. They moved like saucers would skip over water, like a frisbee, maybe. He didn't say they were really shaped like saucers. In fact, he described them as shaped like stingrays. It's very interesting, though, that because the newspapers and TV and radio of the time picked up the phrase flying saucers as how they were shaped, which isn't what he said, then people began to see flying saucers. So that's one oddity in what I call the founding myth. His story of these 9 objects was it's the creation myth of the modern UFO phenomenon. So what you're referring to is after he passed away, his daughter came forward. A woman named Kim Arnold. She was the keeper of the family archives, and she'd gotten very close to her father and shared his interest in this powerful experience, which of course changed the family's life. You don't report something like that and become famous without it changing your life. Well, here's what she said after her father died. She said, my father, Ken Arnold, was always mystified by the assumption that what he had seen was nuts and bolts craft from outer space. That isn't what he saw, and it isn't what he reported seeing. My father described 9 objects that seemed to pulsate, almost like the beat of the human heart. Wow. And they changed their densities from opaque to more translucent. So they seemed to be translucent to light. He felt that they were not from outer space, but he had a deep intuition, which he kept to himself, for good reasons, but he shared with his family. He said, these events, these objects in the sky appeared to be from another dimension, beyond time and space as we know it. It struck me that they had to do with the realm that we call death. Very powerful experience. If that had been what he reported that day, maybe the modern UFO mythology, and I use the word in a positive sense, the belief system, the modern UFO phenomenon would have been understood more in terms of a spiritual or an inner, a phenomenon that was not strictly speaking extraterrestrial. So here's one more detail that you're aware of because you read into this. The interesting thing that day, in addition to the fact that he kept that to himself and didn't publicize it, and she didn't make it known until after her father had died, that day when he flew back to Boise, Idaho, which is where the family lived, got in his car at the airport and drove home, there began to appear in the house orbs of light floating inside the house, red, blue, green, balls of light. As you probably know, orbs of light are a common manifestation of the UFO phenomenon. And in fact, there's a phrase that's used these days. Sometimes the phenomenon will follow you home. It's like a hitchhiker phenomenon. If you have an experience in Washington, D.C., and you get on a plane and go home to Colorado, maybe it'll be in your house when you get home.
I think
whatever Ken Arnold saw that day over Mount Rainier was part of a field, part of a reality that is not only an outer reality. He did see something as an outer reality, but it had great inner significance. And how did it follow him home and appear as orbs of light in his house? So right there, you're dealing with the complexity that has never been told, not widely known. So I, in a sense, broke these additional details. I was not the first to do so, but I think my book is probably the first to really publicize that there was another dimension to that whole story.
You know, I just said that I took all of these steps forward that I've had with my alien phobia, but the idea that you can have a UFO sighting and then they follow you home. Listen, I know how to get a ghost or a demon out of my house. I'm not worried about that. I don't know what to do if there's an alien in my house. I don't know. Yeah, I call you. You can take it home. It can be your pet. That in itself terrifies me. But it is a valid point, though, to really kind of look at that. And we hear so many different things about how people are affected by their alien encounters and their UFO encounters, from just the anxiety and becoming like this pariah if you speak up about it, to, I mean, radiation exposure, people finding chips in their body, all sorts of stuff. But it's never really been discussed really about the concept of it coming home with you and how it may manifest and appear afterwards. So I think that's a really interesting thing to look at.
There's one, let me make reference to one more story. Mm-hmm. And the first of the alien abduction stories, as you probably know, was Betty and Barney Hill.
I was literally going to bring them up to you, and you are right there with me. Keep going.
Okay, good, because it's related to the same kind of phenomena that Ken Arnold saw. Whatever they saw on the way home that night, They lost time. There was a sense of missing time. And as they did hypnosis later, they surfaced details like an apparent craft and being taken inside the craft and examined. Okay, let's take that all at face value, put it on the table. I'm not interested in taking things off the table. I want more details to be put on the table. I don't believe in ruling things out. I believe in ruling things in. Well, here's a part of the Arnold story that was not widely told. Just as the Betty and Barney Hill story that was not widely told. Just as Ken Arnold went home and found the house filled with floating balls of etheric light, Betty and Barney Hill, after their abduction experience, found things happening like the water in the kitchen sink would turn itself on and off. There would be bumps in the walls, footsteps on the stairway. They'd come home from a party and all the clothes would be put out on the bed. This is poltergeist territory, folks. This is more closer to a haunting than an invasion. So it doesn't take away the external aspects that we associate with maybe the UFO framework, but it brings in the paranormal. So all I'm saying is I don't know what this is. I'm still one of those people who says, as long as I've been looking at this phenomenon, I still don't know what a UFO is. I can't say. It's a very powerful presence of light. Has a great deal of energy associated with it. It's often blinding. I think it somehow changes the perceptions. Well, it does change the perceptions of witnesses. This phenomenon is interacting with some part of us that we don't understand very well about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that puts it in a different category than just the ET model. Mm-hmm. I'll name one more thing. The early abduction researchers, a researcher named Bud Hopkins, and especially one named David Jacobs. Jacobs was a sincere pursuer of this phenomenon, but there were certain flaws in his method. When he would interview somebody who purported to be an alien abductee, he would interview them to eliminate witnesses, to eliminate abductees as potential. Let me put it this way. He would eliminate witnesses as potential abductees if they reported that there was a transformative or positive spiritual dimension. Now, do you see what I'm saying? He said, oh, you think it was spiritual? Well, then you're bringing in spiritual stuff. These are hardcore kidnappings. Well, if I could say to him, sir, you come in with that premise. If you exclude people who don't have a hardcore kidnapping experience, but who feel they have a transformational experience, and they might actually feel that they've had past lives, that they have spirit guides, he would not work with people who claim to have spirit guides, because that's just woo. I'm often amazed. I go, wait a minute, you're saying alien abductions are most certainly true, but spiritual experiences and paranormal experiences, we can't get into that stuff. That's just woo. So in a strange way, this kind of a selection bias is brought on the UFO field by its own belief systems and its own prejudices.
Yeah. So speaking of the abductions, you know what's a fun fact is that I know Betty and Barney Hill's granddaughter. She
Really?
became a very famous UFC fighter. Like,
cool.
Yeah, there's a video game. It's funny. Angela Hill is Betty and Barney Hill's granddaughter.
Oh,
and
wow.
Matt, my partner, he got her into UFC fighting, and she became this famous fighter. So it's a funny story to come back around. With abductions, though, why do you think abductions occur, may not occur? What is your idea of abductions from your experience and research and talking to people that may have had these experiences?
I have never had an abduction experience myself. In fact, I often say I've never had a UFO experience. I've never seen anything in the sky that didn't belong there. I did, however, have, and I don't want to go into it unless you want to, and I don't want to avoid the question, but I did have in my 20s a near-death experience, a near-drowning experience, which I was convinced I had died, and I came back. It was before the near-death experience was made famous by Raymond Moody in his book, Life After Life. But just for the sake of, and we could maybe come back to that if you want to, but it's in the book. And it's why I deal with the UFO phenomenon in the same framework as near-death and other paranormal experiences with paranormal content. You know, I don't know why abductions happen. I don't know on how many levels. Are these experiences coming into our world with the same concreteness as the three of us, are now talking via internet and broadcast technology, and solid experiences? They do appear to come into this world. They have physical effects. They also do not appear to be entirely from this world. John Mack, the psychiatrist from Harvard University, who I got to work with closely on as he was investigating the abduction experience, and got in trouble at Harvard finally because they said, John, we really don't want you exploring this kind of stuff. He said, well, why? Aren't we committed to academic freedom? Aren't we interested in going wherever the evidence leads us? Yes, but we think you're taking this too seriously, too literally. But in fact, John Mack did not. He went deeper than any other researcher to point to the uncertainties, to what is not known. He did find this out. As a psychiatrist, the first thing he needed to do, and correctly, was to find out, is there a psychological cause to the abduction syndrome? If it is, it's a new psychiatric condition. We need to find out why people believe they're having physical abductions when it's not. He didn't find that there's any psychological explanation that works. There's a cross-section of people who report abductions. Where they tend to differ is on the sense in which it is either it was either malevolent and something that's very difficult to integrate for some, and for others it turns out to have a highly transformative dimension and points to larger reality. So the answer is I don't know, but I don't know fully how to explain the abduction phenomenon, except it is not easily reduced to the kinds of simplistic categories that the debunkers like to use. Debunkers as opposed to honest skeptics who have open minds. What a good skeptic says is, show me the evidence, and let's explore the evidence. Let's be critical toward the evidence. A debunker says that doesn't happen because things like that just don't happen. Whatever that is, that's not science.
So speaking of abduction experiences, I mean, I have so many questions for you about your book, about all things UFO related, because now that I've started to open our alien Pandora's box here, I really do have a lot of questions. I'm equally terrified and curious. So I think you guys will make an alien fan out of me yet. But speaking of abductions and people's experiences with it, I think the most common one that comes to so many people's mind that now we've made so much fun of it that it's almost comical, but is the medical experiments that people claim to have. Like, who doesn't immediately at some point in their mind go abduction, anal probing? You know, we just kind of go there. But what do you think about that? Do you think this is like medical experiences and things like that actually happen, or do you have, or why they happen?
Okay, before I go into that, let me touch on something that didn't occur to me when you asked me. What I can say about abductions is they have precursors. They are not merely a phenomena of the UFO frame of reference. That is to say, a researcher named Jacques Vallée, Vallee, one of the smartest observers of this phenomenon, wrote a book called Passport to Magonia. Magonia referred to an ancient French folkloric realm involving non-ordinary beings and their interactions with humans. And what Vallée realized was whatever's going on in the abduction phenomenon in the modern frame of reference, the alien abduction phenomenon, it does have precursors in the Celtic fairy faith, where babies are changed out, human babies are changed out for alien babies in the folklore of those cultures. He also identified parallels with the shamanic cultures, the shamans who interact with spirit beings from the lower, middle, and upper realms. So his idea is whatever's going on is part of a larger human interaction with non-ordinary beings. Now, as for the genetic engineering, I'll just quote Vallée again on that. He's of the mind that if the aliens, real aliens, wanted to get genetic material in large quantities for the purposes of fashioning human-alien hybrids, or hubrids as they're called, human-alien hybrids, hubrids, they would have no trouble with their ability to paralyze and stop action. They'd have no trouble knocking off major genetic and blood centers and major universities, get all the genetic material they need. But he did not thereby say that these interactions between humans and aliens aren't going on. He said we need to take seriously the fact that these aliens are introducing humans to the imagery of genetic engineering. They're leading humans to believe that their genetic material is needed. In other words, it's a display that's being put on, perhaps to influence the human development of new human beliefs or myths. Now, those who believe, who say, well, wait a minute, there's good evidence. So many different abductees report this genetic, these scenarios that are presented, including the scenarios of alleged babies, the hybrid babies that are born and then are shown to the abductees in subsequent abductions. Are these happening at face value, or are they happening as presentations or displays that are being made to influence our culture? I realize it's a broader way to take this subject, but at the very least, to answer your question, yes, people do report that when they are taken, their genetic material is taken, and that it is used to fashion hybrids, that they are later shown when they are born. The ultimate question is, where then are the hybrids? Are they walking among us? That's one of the recurring questions.
It's you, Derek. You're sitting right next to me. I know where the alien babies are.
They're
sitting right next to me.
Literally right here.
Thank you for that. I actually really never thought about hybrid aliens and stuff.
Story for you that we can talk about later. That's part of my story from this last week. I was in Norway.
Did you make an alien baby?
I had an experience that was very similar to what you're talking about, and this happens in home. So this is not me being abducted and not in my life. I know that there has the possibility been that when I was younger, but now it's just like doors open. And I had an experience where you're talking about taking the genetics and taking specific material, and that is what happened this week. And it was a new experience for me. It was not scary. I talk about this a lot, different beings and things like that, but it was not a scary experience. There was paralyzation, like when you were talking about paralyzing, but doing it on a big scale. This was in a way that I was paralyzed, and they tried to put it in a very light way by using light words so that I had no fear about it. And at first I was like, no, I can't. I don't want to do that. And then I felt sensations. I felt like light particles doing it regardless. So
do you ever get nervous about how many aliens and dragons and ghosts are going to make you come to like child support court on the other side because you've just spawned so many illegitimate paranormal babies?
Well, that's the whole thing, is like what he's talking about is this idea of creating hybrids. And so I kind of went into discovery about this, and the answers that I was receiving was about how, as a human being with awakened consciousness and having that activated within our physical body as well within our subtle bodies, is why they will utilize it from certain people and utilize the genetic material in order to help their civilizations heal or expand. It's wild. I have a whole story for you that we'll save, but everything you're talking about is literally my physical experience, and it just happened this week, so it's so interesting that we're even talking about this.
I wish we had more time to get into all of this. We do have to get wrapped up. Derek's definitely going to have a hefty paranormal baby child support bill due one of these days. I feel bad for you on that one, sir. But before we go, Derek, my question for you is, when we look at this, the whole point of us doing the show is we're supposed to look at all of this through a queer lens and use our queer sensibilities. What about this episode and what we've kind of heard from Keith and everything has spoken to you as far as that goes?
Well, it's interesting because to me, on a queer perspective is something that's different. It's not necessarily a stamp on one kind of person, or it's kind of allowing a unicorn to be a unicorn and be that beautiful thing that has connection or insight or views on different things, and goes against the grain, because things like I'm talking about right now, people will make fun of me for, or think I'm crazy, whatever. But I've kind of allowed myself to embody who I am authentically. If that's the queer perspective, if that's me being a unicorn, whatever it is, I love that I can stand in my own power and be able to authentically express myself, share my experiences, so that those other people that feel they are different in whatever respect feel heard, feel seen, and can feel safe while they're here on Earth.
That was kind of my same takeaway. And let me just say, you put that in this really beautiful and eloquent way. You really did. When I was reading Keith's book, there was so much about the people that were brave enough to come forward and share their experiences authentically, and the journalists that shared it and published it. Some of them, like, their careers were ruined because of this, because they were just speaking their truth and trying to share their experiences, and people shut it down and said, no, you're not allowed to. And it was just interesting to me to see that and think about how many other things that we can relate that to, where time and time again, people are kind of shut down for being who they are, speaking their truth. But we have to say thank you to those that did, because they have paved the way for us to be here today, doing what we're doing, being who we are. For us and so many other people around the world, we still have a very long way to go, but we are all paving that way together, be it through living authentically as our queer selves, through really reporting our experiences if you've had them, no matter what. If people are going to make fun of you or shut you down, we all have to do our part to pave this road for the future generation. Keith, thank you so much for coming and being on the show and sharing all of your wonderful knowledge and expertise about such a fascinating subject. Can you please tell our listeners where they can get the UFO Paradox, or where they can follow you and learn more about all of your going-ons within this world and the next?
No, thank you. The book is available at Amazon and on Barnes & Nobles, as well as bookstores. But if you go online at either of those two booksellers, it's available as a print book, an ebook, and also as an audiobook. And as far as how to know more about me and my work, I have a website called www.thompsonatlarge, That's Thompson with a P, THOMPSON, @large.com. So that's how to stay in touch with me, and that's how to find the book. Let me just close with a quick comment about the queering, the phenomenon, the queer dimension of this. It's not an area on which I have expertise, but there's a sense in which the phenomenon is queer. It doesn't fit the categories that are established, the two binaries. Okay, and I don't want to get deeply into the binary politics issue. Gender, is it more than binary or only binary? But this is a phenomenon that's marginalized, that's in the margins of reality. So in that sense, I think they're talking about the queer dimensions, and in fact, there are writers in academia, especially, who do write about the queer dimensions, sexuality, UFOs, near-death experiences, the paranormal. So it's an interesting framework. I celebrate you that you bring it up.
Thank you so much. And that's actually a really good way to put it as well. Again, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Everyone, please go to his website, check out his book. It was a very delightful read. I'm Intuitive Shana. This is our resident alien, Derek. Please make sure that you follow us wherever you get your podcast, like, subscribe. You can get involved with our community, our blogs, all of that at queerfromtheotherside.com. And you can also share your stories, your UFO experiences, your ghost experiences. Have you also spawned lots of illegitimate paranormal babies? We want to know. And until next time, thank you so much and stay spooky, guys.
Bye.
Bye. That was another episode of Queer from the Other Side.
Please like, share, review, and subscribe.
Until next time, stay curious.
I love her music. It's so dramatic.
It's so